On our TikTok channel, we asked our amazing followers for any questions that we have because I wanted to do a Q&A video. I usually have live streams once a week to answer as many questions as I can, but I wanted to make a video showcasing some of the questions that you guys have. So we're going to go through 31 questions that have been asked on TikTok in this video. First of all, thank you everybody who asked questions on TikTok. Love every single one of you. You guys are all incredible. But let's get on to question number 1, and that is from Peyton, who is asking, how do you play a short sport pattern easier? So short sport shots are some of the most difficult ones in my opinion, where a long pattern usually plays a little bit easier, transitions a little more normal, but short patterns are tough. To start with games 1 and 2, one of the best recommendations is really pressing the easy button, and that is Urethane. Urethane is going to be the best option for a short pattern, whether you're rev dominant, balance, or speed dominant, because if you're speed dominant and regular Urethane doesn't look good for you, I always recommend something like the Rattler NU. That ball is absolutely incredible for somebody who doesn't have as many revs or has higher speed, but you still need Urethane-like motion. Go with that. Number 2 is you want a lot of surface on your bowling ball. You want your bowling ball to be at about 500 to 1000 grit, because on a short pattern, your goal is to make your ball reaction as smooth as humanly possible. You need that ball to be super smooth towards the pocket, because the minute you have too much angle, you're going to be leaving those 2-8-10s, you're going to be leaving those Greek churches, you're going to be missing the left side of the head pin. It gets really, really gross. So those are my top quick recommendations for a short pattern. Next up, we are going to Far, who asks, what is the ideal hand position at the release? When I try to release the ball from up the back, it always goes dead straight. That's a very good question and a very tough one to showcase. So you are already in a great position when your hand is right up the back of the bowling ball, but in bowling, you need a little bit of rotation. You want your hand very up the back of it, because that's going to cause your ball reaction to be a little smoother and a little more controllable, but you still need a little bit of rotation. So when your fingers actually go through the bowling ball, if we're looking at a regular clock, you're going to want your fingers around the 5 o'clock to 4 o'clock position when they go through the bowling ball. So right now, Far, it sounds like your fingers are at 6 o'clock at the bottom of a clock, and then they're going right up through 12. Well, you really want them around 4 to 5 o'clock if you're a righty, 7 to 8 o'clock if you're a lefty, and then going through the ball slightly sideways and getting a little bit around it. So that's going to give you some axis rotation so it'll spin correctly. This is one of my favorite names absolutely ever. This is Shaquille Oatmeal is asking, this is more for me than a general question, but what ball in the market right now, or what should I look for in the future for a ball similar to the Proton Physix? So the Storm Proton Physix was an awesome bowling ball from about 3-ish years ago. Super strong cover on it, had that awesome Physix core in it, really good piece. I actually have one behind me right now that I have just recently got drilled, and I'm going to be throwing a little bit more. But what is close to it right now? Well, there's actually 2 really good options. So the Storm Ion Max is probably the closest thing we've gotten to the Proton Physix since the Proton. It is very, very similar. It's a little bit stronger and smoother than the Proton, but in general, they are nearly identical in ball reaction and colors, which is kind of ironic. But the second option is going to be the brand new Physix Blackout. The Physix Blackout has the Pearl version of the Proton Physix cover on it. So it is just a Proton Physix Pearl, but it comes sanded, which makes it very close to that Proton. So if you want a Proton, I would go Ion Max or a Physix Blackout. Longtime member of the channel, Randy, asks an awesome question saying, what advantage do each of the companies have over others? Cover stocks, cores, and pros and cons. This is such a good question, and one that doesn't get answered that often, because a lot of YouTubers for bowling are staffers. They don't like to talk about other companies that often, but the general consensus from most people is that Storm Bowling, all of the Storm products, are going to be the longest, and they're going to hook the latest but be the sharpest. That is what Storm has been notorious for years and years and years. Now, over the last 2 years, they've kind of gone away from that and made a lot of smoother shapes, especially with that AI core. But that new Road Warrior really showed that they can still make a skid snap motion. So in general, Storm is going to have the longest ball reaction, the latest ball reaction down lane, but it will be the sharpest in general. If you grab 2 asymmetrical solids, Storm will probably be a little bit longer, where Brunswick is going to be in between, where it's going to be much earlier than Storm, but it's going to be a little closer. If you asked me 5 years ago, Brunswick equipment was insanely early and insanely slow down lane. They've really fixed that with HK22, where it's much closer to Storm and the companies are much more similar than you would expect, but it is generally earlier and smoother equipment. And then Motive by far and away is going to be the earliest hooking bowling balls on the market, and they're going to be the smoothest and the most tumbly down lane. And by tumbly, it means they're just going to roll. They're not really going to have a big hockey stick type motion. Moving on to our next question, we have Alex W, who is asking, struggling with a consistent release, tips regarding walk up and release, also aiming for a spot down lane. How does one do that consistently? So we're going to hit part 1 of this question, which is working on a consistent release. So the number one thing I always want to give people when working on a consistent release is make sure your fit is correct. There are a ton of awesome videos on YouTube to showcase what a proper bowling fit feels like and looks like, and that is the number one thing, because you cannot out bowl a bad fit on your bowling ball. If your grip is wrong, if your thumb is way too big, if your span is too short or too long, it's very hard to be consistent. I was notorious for that a couple of years ago. My span was too short. Consistency was terrible. Where now with a better span, it feels much more normal, and I can actually hit my spot down lane so much easier. So step 1 is make sure your fit is correct. Step number 2 is really just get the hang of bowling. So usually consistency comes with a lot of muscle memory, and then also lack of using muscle is a big one. In bowling, similar to other technical sports, you don't want to use much muscle. The more muscle you use, the more inconsistency you add. So the less muscle you have in your arms, in your forearms, your biceps, the less you're using, the better your shot's going to be. J.R. Raymond always liked to say it in his old videos of, you always use muscle and you always, it's in every shot no matter what, but you don't need to use that much. If you're really trying to throw the ball and you feel it in your shoulder, you're not doing it correctly. Try to be a lot smoother and a lot softer. And then let's hit the second part of that question of aiming for a spot down lane. So a lot of people have different aiming techniques. Some people look at their break point and that is it. I know some people that look at a pin and that's it. Otherwise, most people look at the arrows and the boards between the arrows. That's always my recommendation. But the most optimal way of doing it is knowing where you want your ball to hook, the break point at about 40 to 45 feet, where you want your ball to start moving towards the pocket. You look at that, you make a line between that and the arrows, a spot on the arrows, and then where you are. And then you just keep that in your head as you throw it, and you try to make your ball project through that line. That is the most optimal strategy for aiming. Hendricks coming in with the tried and true urethane question of what's the best urethane bowling ball? The long story short of it is the Purple Hammer, by far and away the best urethane bowling ball ever created, and no one has gotten close to it. Hopefully someone can get close one day, but Purple Hammer by far and away the best. In general, if you cannot throw the Purple Hammer, then I would recommend either the Pitch Black if you're not bowling a PBA competition, or then the Black Hammer 78D. Those are going to be the best options right now. Motive has a couple decent options with the Tank Rampage Pearl. That one's pretty good, but if you need true urethane, I still will go with the Purple Hammer. Now we have an Arsenal question from Zach asking, I have the Beyond Infinity right now, and what ball should I look into getting next as a two-hander? So you already have a strong and sharp bowling ball, and as a two-hander, you're definitely going to want something a little bit weaker. So I'm going to recommend a weaker, medium, and smooth bowling ball, and it looks like you already have a Brunswick ball, so I'm going to stick in that family. So in that family, I will recommend my personal favorite bowling ball. No, I'm not trying to just be biased on this, but the Scorpion Low Flare is my answer. It's a much weaker, medium, and smooth bowling ball, which is going to pair well with the Beyond Infinity. It's going to be a smoother option for you. You can play a little bit straighter, and if the Beyond Infinity starts hooking too early and starts leaving a lot of corner pins or is too sharp, the Low Flare really comes in clutch here. If you want an actual Pearl bowling ball to pair with it, I would go Scorpion Strike from Hammer. That's another fantastic choice. Some options from other companies would be a Venom Shock from Motive would work really well instead of the Low Flare, or the Summit Ascent from Storm instead of the Low Flare. And we have one of our favorite channel members, VSP Rara, coming in with a question asking, what is the best 3-ball arsenal? Keeps it very generalized, very broad, but my favorite 3-ball arsenal going to our arsenal scale is going to be a strong and sharp ball, which is usually an asymmetrical pearl, a medium smooth ball, which is usually a symmetrical solid ball, and then a weak and sharp ball, which is generally a weaker symmetrical pearl ball. So let's just use motive for an example here. If you wanted to make a motive 3-ball arsenal using this, I would go with something like a Raptor Rush, a Venom Shock, and then something like a Supra GT, I think would be the good 1, 2, 3 in there. And this works for any company, and there's a ton of other options, but that is the best 3-ball arsenal. If we had to go with what my favorites are based on our top 5 of 2024, I would go Track Theorem in the strong and sharp. I would go phase 2 in the medium smooth. I know we had other balls in that slot already, but phase 2 is still the GOAT. So I'd go phase 2. And then in the weak and sharp category, I think we would go with the Track Tundra Blue Fire. We're going to a layout question from Ryan Lashley asking how to find a layout that is the most beneficial to you. Like, how would a one-hander's layout differ from a two-hander? This is a really good question that I could get into insane amounts of scientific detail on, and other companies like Storm, for example, go into absurd physics details on these questions. But to keep it very generalized, normally a layout for a one-hander will be something where the pin is somewhere around the fingers, because the way the core is lined up, you need those fingers to be somewhere around the pin to have proper ball motion. If they're too far away, then it really gets bad. But as a one-hander, the middle of your grip is really what matters, and your positive access point. So if your pin is not within 2-ish inches of your fingers, you could generally be a little bit worried that it might not be great. To know for sure, always go check with your Pro Shop operator, because then you can find your positive access point and you can reverse engineer your layouts. I do have videos explaining dual angle and the Storm 2LS layout system, so you can use those to reverse engineer your layout if you know your positive access point, but otherwise work with your Pro Shop operator. But then how does it differ from a two-hander? Two-handers are interesting because a two-hander's center of grip is between their fingers, because you can't put a thumb hole in the ball. Now for a one-hander, your center of grip is in the middle of your palm. So it's in between your fingers and your thumb. So that's where the pin is radically different. So as a one-hander, your center of grip, the distance between that and the pin, is like what a two-hander's layout would be between the fingers and the pin. So something good to think about: if you're a two-hander and your pin is very close to your fingers, it's not drilled correctly. It is not drilled for you. It's not drilled for a two-hander. It's something that was drilled for a one-hander. So I'd go check that out then. That is going to do it for part 1 of our Q&A video. We had about 30 questions, so I want to make these videos manageable to watch in a couple sessions. So thank you guys all who've asked questions so far. We'll have another part coming out very, very soon. Make sure to subscribe so you're the first to get notified when that goes live. Otherwise, thank you for watching.